I feel like I've reached some sort of stability with my Leica gear. I'm pretty happy with what I have right now, and I'm not planning on buying any more cameras for a long time. So this would be a good time to go over all three of my Leica cameras and all of the lenses that go with them. This is just a recap of what's been my experience with Leica so far. So I'll go over all the cameras and lenses that I own. I won't be going into the other accessories like my camera bags or straps, except for the accessories that are on the cameras right now. First disclaimer, I'm not a professional photographer. I do this just as a hobby and I'm a pure amateur. I don't claim to know a lot about photography and I'm just learning photography and videography. And I'm not claiming that anyone needs a Leica in order to make good photos. So going from my oldest to newest camera, the first nice camera that I actually had was the Leica CL. It's a nice compact camera. It's small and has interchangeable lenses, but I upgraded from that and I felt like I didn't really need to keep the CL. I had 4 TL lenses with that, the 18, 23, 35, and the 60. So I'd sold 3 of those lenses but kept the 60 millimeter TL lens, and now I use that with my SL2S. So the SL2S is a very capable camera. It's also very heavy, and I initially had the 24 to 70 lens, but that just added more weight to this camera, and it was just too heavy for me to carry around, so I sold that lens. But I still like having this 60 millimeter TL lens. This converts to a 90 millimeter field of view, and the best thing about this lens is it also has a macro capability. So this is a nice lens to use for portraits and for macro. I like the blacked out Leica label on the front. This does have only 24 megapixels compared to the SL2, which has a much higher pixel density. But this is still a professional camera. It does good low light photography. It has a lot of different buttons that are customizable. And the electronic viewfinder is one of the best I've ever seen. The on-off toggle is very sturdy, and I like that joystick for navigation. It's much easier to navigate than using a directional pad. It has that extra display on the top. It's very customizable, but I actually usually only use this camera on full auto mode. The dials and buttons are not labeled, so it can be a little bit confusing to figure out what all of the buttons and dials do if I haven't used this camera for a while. The inputs are on the left with the HDMI port, charging USB, microphone, and headphone ports. I thought this rubber panel might be unstable, but it's been working fine so far. And the 2 SD card slots on the right. For accessories, I just have this thumbs up support, which I find is very helpful to get a good grip. I haven't gotten a case for this yet. I think it would add some extra protection, but it would also add a lot more bulk to this camera. And it's already bulky to start out with. And the only other lens I have for the SL2S is this 35 millimeter Summicron SL. It's not the Apple version, but this is good enough for me. It is still pretty sharp, in my opinion, and it's also very lightweight and much smaller than the Apple 35 SL. So I'm using this Leica SL2S now, mostly for outdoor videos where I have the chance to use either the 35 or 90 millimeter field of view, and I usually use it on a tripod when I go outdoors. And I also use it when I want to take quick photographs where I want to have an autofocus lens. Again, I usually use it on all automatic, and I haven't really tried out or experimented with changing around the settings or using a manual mode. My next camera was the Q2, which I'll get into later, but I really wanted to get into the rangefinder experience. So I went ahead and got the M11, and this is my best looking camera out of all 3. It's also very compact and small. And the best thing is it has the interchangeable lens, and you can fit any M lens onto this. For the accessories, I have an Oberwerth leather half case, which has an open door at the bottom, and it has a built-in hand grip on the side. And this is a really great quality case. And I have a leather strap from Leica, which is actually very close in color to match the case. And I have an inexpensive shutter release button I got from Amazon. And of course, the thumbs up support from Leica. At first, I thought I would have difficulty focusing with the rangefinder patch, but I've had a pretty good experience with that. Not too much difficulty. I still miss some focus, especially when shooting wide open at 1.4, but it's not the fault of the camera, and I'm getting better at focusing as I use the lenses more often. At first, I would just shoot on aperture priority mode, but now I'm getting more into manual photography and setting the ISO on the side and the shutter speed also. It's been fun learning how to shoot manual, and I'm getting better at that slowly. The build quality of the camera body is excellent. All the dials and all the buttons feel very solid. I haven't had any problems with this build quality. As for my lenses, I went a little bit overboard, and I probably have one too many lenses. I recommend buying lenses used to save some money and depreciation costs. So out of these lenses, I bought 2 of these used, and the rest were new. My first one I purchased is this 50mm Summilux. This is the older version, but this still does very well for me. All of my Leica M lenses, with the exception of one of them, have superior build quality. All of the focus rings and aperture rings have just the right amount of resistance and smoothness. This 50mm f1.4 has a very shallow depth of field when shooting wide open. I like to use this as a portrait lens. If you can get close enough to the subject and the background is far enough away, it has an excellent bokeh effect. It is a little bit large and long on the M body, so it's not as easy to take around as my 35 or 28. So I don't use this as often as my 35. I did buy and try out 2 other lenses, which I've since sold, and those were bought pre-owned, the 28mm f2.8 and the 35mm f2. But out of these, the next one that I purchased is the 35mm FLE2, which is on the camera, and this is one of my favorite lenses. It's extremely sharp, has very narrow depth of field with the f1.4, and has a good size on the camera and great build quality. I think the 35 is the most versatile focal length for me, and I enjoy shooting that the most along with the 28. And next I wanted to try out an even longer focal length, so I purchased the 75mm Apo Summicron M, and this is my only Apo lens. It is longer and heavier than my 50mm, but it does have a longer reach. And the images come out extremely sharp, and I love the colors that this renders. But this might be one of my least used lenses. I seem to prefer 35 and 28 more, but the good thing about this is having this, I don't feel the need to buy a 90mm M lens. With the 75, I can just crop in, so I can't justify the purchase of a 90mm. So my 35mm FLE2, 50mm Summilux, and 75 Apo Summicron all have a modern build quality and modern lenses, so they give a really contemporary look, very sharp and modern looking images. So next I went with one of their reissue lenses, the 28mm Summicron, to use as my character lens. And this is a very tiny lens. It has a nice look with the chrome lens on a black body. And it does need a lot of light because the maximum aperture is 5.6. But with that, it also doesn't need a lot of attention to focusing. So I like this one because of how compact and lightweight it is. I can easily take it with me as a secondary lens. And I like that vintage looking character of the images that come out with this lens. And I like that so much that I went in and got the other reissue, the 35mm steel rim reissue. And this is at f1.4 maximum aperture. So you really get an extra shallow depth of field with this one. And this gives you even better bokeh effect because of that f1.4 aperture. And this is the only exception to the build quality. The aperture ring is just slightly wobbly, so it doesn't have that extra nice build quality as the modern M lenses. And lastly, I got an extra wide lens. This is my widest lens at 21. And this is the 21mm Super Elmar f3.4. So I wanted to get this just in case I needed to get an extra wide angle. I'm still experimenting with this lens and trying to use it more, but again, this is one of my least used lenses so far. But another great thing about these M lenses, besides the fact that they're so small and compact, is I can mount any of them on my SL2S with my M to L adapter. And this is a great way to use these M lenses. It's especially helpful with my 75 and with my 50 or even my 35 when it's shooting wide open. Getting that extra focus assistance and focus peaking and that superb electronic viewfinder, it really helps to get everything in extra sharp focus. So right now this is a great 2-camera system. I use the SL2S now for outdoor video on a tripod, where I can use my 35 or 90mm focal length with autofocus. And I'm also using it for macro shots of my watches on the desktop. And it's also great to take photos of fast-moving subjects with its autofocus feature. And I'm using my M11 to take around with me when I want to really enjoy photography and get into the manual experience. And the great thing is that all my M lenses can be used on the SL2S. But I was enjoying my Q2 so much that I decided to upgrade to the Q3 earlier this year. The Q3 does so much. It has a great lens for taking photography. You can use it in autofocus, or you can do it all manual. You can set the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO however you want it, or you can just let the camera do everything. And just like my SL2S, I usually shoot this in automatic mode. It also does great video, and it's lighter and more compact than the SL2S, so this is a lot easier to take around everywhere I go. And I'm liking that flip screen with the Q3, and I'm finding this helpful when I'm shooting photos or video from the hip. Build quality, I've had no issues with this either. Getting the ring out of autofocus into manual focus is a little bit difficult. And on my Q2, I had this outer ring actually pop off on me once, and I had to super glue it back on. But I haven't had any build issues with the Q3. When I first got it, it did freeze about 1 or 2 times, but I haven't had it freezing up anymore since then. For the accessories, I have the RT Demano half case, and it has a full opening bottom door. The only thing, it does not have an opening on the side to access the USB charging port. But I usually don't charge this with USB. I usually just take out the battery and put it in my SL2S, and I charge the SL2S with the USB cable. So that's nice that the battery is interchangeable, so I always have an extra battery with me. And I have the thumbs up support from Leica, again, a inexpensive shutter release button from Amazon, and I have this lens hood from the QP, which was made in silver. And the rope strap comes from Leica. I also like using the macro mode function, but over time I find that the macro ring actually gets looser over time, so it's easier to have this move out inadvertently. And as an extra feature, I also have this L Pro E52, which can actually just screw on the front of this lens to give you extra magnification. So right now I use this as a daily camera when I want to take photos with autofocus and use everything on automatic mode. If I want to take something with me that's small and I want to use manual, then I usually take my M11. And I also use this for taking quick videos, videos inside, and I usually use L-log at this point. But the only downside to this camera is it has a fixed lens, 28mm. So if I want to take video with a longer focal length, I have to use my SL2S. And same thing, if I want to take photos at a longer focal length, I either have to crop in, which I don't mind cropping in to 35, but I don't really like cropping in much more than that. And then in that case, I'll have to take my M11 or SL2S. So those are my three Leica cameras for now. The Q3 and the M11 are still very new to me, so I'll be keeping them for several years. I'm still growing with them and still learning photography with those two cameras. But I think I have one or two extra M lenses that I could afford to let go of, either the 21 or the 75. I'm thinking about selling one or both of those. And I'm starting to wonder if I really need to keep the SL2S. The only thing that's keeping me from selling it is the option of shooting autofocus with the video or photography with the 90mm focal length, and the option to use my M lenses to get a little bit extra help with focus. Other than that, the Q3 or the M11 can do almost everything else that the SL2S can do. But I am keeping it for now, and I'm just happy to have those extra options.